Georgiana Thorne counted the coins in her leather pouch for the third time that night, her fingers trembling with exhaustion as the last drunken cowboy stumbled out of the red satin saloon into the dusty streets of Wickenburg, Arizona territory. And she knew with crushing certainty that after 2 years of saving every penny, she still did not have enough for the stagecoach ticket to San Francisco. The oil lamps cast long shadows across the empty dancehall floor as she sat at one of the round tables, still wearing her red satin dress with its layers of petticoats that whispered with every movement. Her feet ached from hours of dancing with miners and ranch hands who smelled of whiskey and tobacco, men who held her too close during waltzes while she smiled and pretended not to notice. The coins clinked as she poured them back into the pouch. $43.60. She needed $60 for the ticket, plus at least 20 more for food and lodging once she arrived in California. The number seemed impossibly distant, like a star she could see but never touch. "Still counting your dreams, Georgie?" Madame Lucille's voice cut through the silence. The saloon owner stood in the doorway to her private office, her painted face showing every one of her 50 years in the lamplight. She had been beautiful once, or so the old-timers said, but the whiskey and the years had carved hard lines around her mouth and eyes. "Just making sure it is all there," Georgiana said quietly, tucking the pouch into the pocket she had sewn into her dress specifically for this purpose. She never left her savings anywhere else, not even in her small room upstairs. She had seen too many girls get their money stolen by the other dancers, or by the men who serviced the rooms. "You have been here 2 years now," Madame Lucille said, walking closer with the slow, calculated steps of a woman who had learned to navigate saloon floors in heels through decades of practice. "You are one of my best girls. The men ask for you specifically. I could give you better percentage if you would do more than just dance." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke. Georgiana had heard variations of this conversation at least once a month, since she had arrived in Wickenburg in the spring of 1883, desperate and alone after her father had died of fever on their wagon journey west. She had been 18 then, with no money, no family, and no prospects in a town that had little use for unmarried women except in establishments like this one. "I am grateful for the work you have given me," Georgiana said carefully, meeting the older woman's eyes. "But I dance. That is all I do." Madame Lucille's expression hardened. "Girls with your scruples do not last long out here. The dance hall is not a stepping stone to respectability, girl. The sooner you accept what you are, the easier your life will be." "I know what I am," Georgiana said, rising from the table with as much dignity as she could muster. "I am someone who is leaving as soon as I can afford to." She walked past Madame Lucille toward the narrow staircase that led to the cramped rooms above the saloon where the dancers slept. Her room was barely large enough for a bed and a washstand, but it was hers. She locked the door behind her and finally let herself slump against it, the weariness of the night settling into her bones. Through the thin walls, she could hear Sally Mee crying in the next room. Sally Mee had arrived 6 months ago with the same determination Georgiana had once possessed, but the work had broken something in her. She spent her money on laudanum now instead of saving it, and her eyes had taken on the glazed, distant look of someone who was already half gone from this world. Georgiana changed out of her dance dress into her simple cotton nightgown and washed her face in the basin, scrubbing away the rouge and powder that Madame Lucille insisted they all wear. In the cracked mirror above the washstand, her own face looked back at her, pale and exhausted. She was 20 years old, but sometimes she felt ancient. She lay in bed and calculated again, as she did every night. If she could save $5 a week, She would have enough in about 8 weeks. But that assumed no unexpected expenses, no slow weeks when the miners stayed away from town, no emergencies that would force her to dip into her savings. In reality, it would probably take 3 or 4 months, maybe more. And every day she stayed in Wickenburg was another day she risked becoming like Sally Me, or worse, like Madame Lucille, trapped in this life until she was too old and worn to do anything else. The next evening, Georgiana arrived downstairs just as the first customers were filtering in. Saturday nights were always busy, and she steeled herself for the long hours ahead. She had just pinned up her hair and adjusted her dress when she noticed a man she had never seen before standing at the bar. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-browned skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His clothes were clean but well-worn, the clothes of a working cowboy rather than a wealthy rancher. Dark brown hair curled slightly at his collar beneath a dusty hat, and when he turned to survey the room, she saw a face that was more interesting than handsome, with strong features and startlingly blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Their gazes met across the room, and something flickered in those blue eyes. Not the predatory look she was used to seeing from men in the saloon, but something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of some kind, though she was certain she had never seen him before. "That is Porter Kane," whispered Lily, another dancer who had appeared beside Georgiana. "He has a small ranch about 10 miles outside town, keeps to himself mostly, but he is here every few months for supplies. Decent tipper, does not get too drunk, and he actually knows how to dance without stepping on your feet." "How do you know?" Georgiana asked. "Danced with him last time he was in town. He is quiet but polite. You could do a lot worse on a Saturday night." As if he had heard them, Porter Kane picked up his whiskey glass and walked toward them. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, neither swaggering nor hesitant. When he reached them, he nodded politely to both women before his gaze settled on Georgiana. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "Would you care to dance?" "That is what I am here for," Georgiana replied with her practiced smile, the one that was friendly but not too warm, inviting but not promising anything beyond a dance. He offered his arm and she took it, letting him lead her to the floor where several other couples were already moving to the piano player's rendition of a popular waltz. The moment his hand settled at her waist and she placed her hand in his, she realized Lily had been right. He did know how to dance. "You are new to Wickenburg?" she asked as they moved across the floor. It was her standard opening, the polite small talk expected of dance hall girls. "No, madam. Had my ranch here for about 3 years now. Just do not make it into town much except when I need supplies or when the work gets lonely enough that I crave a bit of civilization." His blue eyes met hers again, and there was a hint of amusement in them. "Though I am not sure a saloon counts as civilization, strictly speaking." Despite herself, Georgiana felt a smile tug at her lips, a real one this time. "It is probably the closest thing to it in Wickenburg. You might be right about that." He spun her carefully, navigating around another couple with practiced ease. "I have not seen you here before." "I have been here 2 years," she said, surprised. "Though I suppose if you only come to town every few months, we would have missed each other." 2 years in Wickenburg," he said thoughtfully. "That is a long time. You from around here originally?" "No. My father and I were traveling west when he died of fever. I was stranded here." She did not know why she was telling him this. She usually kept her history vague, offering just enough details to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything real. But something about his steady gaze and the genuine interest in his voice made her want to be honest. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly, and she could tell he meant it. "Do you have other family back east?" "No one who would claim me," she said. It was the truth. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father's family had disowned him when he married below his station. She was alone in the world, which was precisely why she was still in Wickenburg, instead of somewhere safer and more respectable. The music ended and Porter Kane released her with obvious reluctance. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Georgiana," she said. "Georgiana Thorne." "Miss Thorne," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "I am Porter Kane. Would you do me the honor of another dance?" She should have moved on to another customer, should have circulated the way Madame Lucille expected. But she found herself nodding, and when the next song started, she stepped back into his arms as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They danced 3 more times that evening, and each time, the conversation came a little easier. He told her about his ranch, a small operation with about 50 head of cattle and 2 horses. He had come west from Missouri after the war, looking for a fresh start like so many others. He was 26 years old, had never been married, and lived alone except for a half-wild dog he had found abandoned on the range. "Why are you really in town tonight?" Georgiana asked during their 4th dance. "You do not seem like the type of man who gets lonely enough to need company in a saloon." He was quiet for a moment, and she worried she had overstepped. But then he said, "Maybe I was looking for something without knowing what it was, and maybe I just found it." Her heart did something strange in her chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with the dancing. She was used to men saying sweet things, making promises they had no intention of keeping, but something in Porter Kane's voice told her he meant exactly what he said, no more and no less. When the night finally ended and the last customers stumbled out into the darkness, Georgiana counted her earnings. $15, more than she had ever made in a single night. Porter Kane had paid for every dance, tipping generously each time, and several other men had competed for her attention once they saw a cowboy willing to pay premium rates. She added the money to her pouch. $58.60. So close now. Just 1 more good week, maybe 2, and she would have enough. But as she lay in bed that night, she found herself thinking not about San Francisco, but about a pair of blue eyes and a man who had danced with her like she was someone worthy of respect. Porter Kane returned to the saloon the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Each time, he danced exclusively with Georgiana, paying for her time with money he could probably not afford to spend. They talked about everything and nothing, his quiet presence becoming something she looked forward to with an intensity that frightened her. "You are playing with fire," Lily warned her one evening as they watched Porter arrive and head straight for the bar, his eyes already searching for Georgiana. Cowboys like him. They start thinking dance hall girls might actually care about them, and then they get their hearts broken when they realize it is all just business. "It is just business," Georgiana said, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Tell that to your face when he walks in," Lily said knowingly. "You light up like a damn candle." Georgiana wanted to argue, but she could not. The truth was that she had started counting the days between Porter's visits, had started saving the things he said to her like precious gems she could take out and examine in the quiet darkness of her room. She knew it was dangerous. She knew nothing could come of it. She was a dance hall girl with a ruined reputation, and he was a struggling rancher who could barely afford his visits to town. They had no future together, but her heart, foolish thing that it was, had apparently not received that message. "Evening, Miss Thorne," Porter said when he reached her, and there it was again, that flutter in her chest. "Evening, Mr. Kane," she replied, taking his offered arm. They danced as they always did, but tonight something felt different. There was a tension in the air between them, something unspoken building to a crescendo. Finally, as they moved through a slow waltz, Porter cleared his throat. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, "and I would appreciate it if you would hear me out before you respond." Georgiana's heart began to pound. "All right. I have been coming here every week for almost 2 months now," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "And I have spent money I probably should have saved for winter feed. I have told myself I was just enjoying the company, the dancing, the conversation. But that would be a lie." He paused, and she felt his hand tighten slightly at her waist. "The truth is, I have been coming here because of you. Because you are the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before I sleep. Because talking to you makes me feel like maybe I am not just some lonely cowboy slowly going to seed on a failing ranch. Because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves so much more than this place can offer." Georgiana's throat tightened. "Porter, let me finish," he said gently. "I know what you are saving for. I have seen you counting your money when you think no one is watching. You want to leave, to start over somewhere new, and I think that is exactly what you should do." Relief and disappointment warred in her chest. Of course, he was not going to declare his feelings or ask her to consider him. He was too practical for that, too realistic about the vast gulf between what he could offer and what she needed. It was the right response, the smart response. So why did it hurt so much? "Thank you," she managed to say. "I appreciate your understanding." "I am not finished," Porter said, and now there was something fierce in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. "I think you should go to San Francisco, and I think I should go with you." The music seemed to fade away. The other couples on the floor, the noise from the bar, Madame Lucille's sharp laugh from across the room, all of it disappeared until there was only Porter Kane and his impossible suggestion hanging in the air between them. "What?" she whispered. "I have been thinking about this for weeks," he said, the words coming faster now, as if he had been holding them back for too long and they were finally breaking free. "I have been saving too. Not as long as you, but I have got about $100 put away. My ranch, it is not worth much, but I could sell it, sell the cattle, and we would have enough to start over somewhere new. Together." "Porter, you cannot be serious. You do not know me. We have only danced, talked. You cannot throw away your entire life for someone you barely know." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you are strong and determined. I know you have spent 2 years in this place without letting it break you. I know you are kind, because I have watched you help Sally me when she is too far gone on laudanum to make it upstairs on her own. I know you are smart, because you have managed to save money in a job that seems designed to keep you from ever getting ahead. And I know that when I am with you, I feel something I have never felt before." "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Hope," he said simply. "You make me feel like life could be more than just surviving, like maybe there is something worth building toward, and if you will let me, I would like to build it with you." Tears stung Georgiana's eyes. No one had ever said anything like this to her, had ever looked at her like she was something precious and valuable instead of just a dance hall girl trading smiles for coins. It was everything she had never known she wanted, and it terrified her. "I cannot let you do this," she said, even as every part of her screamed to say yes. "What if you regret it? What if you wake up one day and realize you gave up everything for someone who is not worth it?" "Then I will have lived more in one day with you than I have in all the years without you," Porter said. "But I do not think I will regret it. I think this is the first truly right thing I have ever done." The music ended. They stood together on the dance floor, other couples moving around them, while Georgiana tried to make her mind work through the chaos of her emotions. This was insane. She barely knew him. He barely knew her. People did not just give up their lives and run away to San Francisco with dance hall girls they had been acquainted with for 2 months. But then again, what did she have to lose? She was already planning to leave. She was already going to be alone in a new city with no connections and no guarantee of success. If Porter Kane wanted to come with her, wanted to take that risk with her, who was she to tell him no? How would this work? She asked, her voice shaking. Are you asking me to marry you? I am asking you to give me a chance, Porter said. We can go to San Francisco, start fresh as two people trying to make a life. If you want to marry me, I would be honored. If you want to wait to see if what we have is real outside the walls of a saloon, I understand that too. I just want to be with you, whatever that looks like. Georgiana closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Every practical part of her brain screamed that this was foolish, that she should stick to her original plan, that relying on anyone except herself was asking for heartbreak. But there was another voice, smaller but growing stronger, that whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was her chance at something real. She opened her eyes and looked at Porter Kane, really looked at him. Saw the hope and fear mingling in his expression, the vulnerability in the way he waited for her answer. This was a man who had worked alone on a struggling ranch for 3 years, who had come west to escape whatever ghosts haunted him in Missouri, who had somehow found the courage to offer her everything he had. All right, she whispered, and then louder, all right. Yes. Let us go to San Francisco together. The smile that broke across Porter's face was like sunrise, and before she could second-guess herself, he swept her into his arms and spun her around right there on the dance floor, both of them laughing like children while the other dancers stared and whispered. The following week moved in a blur of preparation and planning. Porter put his ranch up for sale and found a buyer within 3 days, a wealthy rancher from Prescott who was looking to expand his holdings. The price was not as much as the property was probably worth, but Porter did not haggle. He seemed determined to leave as quickly as possible, as if he feared Georgiana might change her mind if given too much time to think. Georgiana gave Madame Lucille 2 weeks' notice, enduring the woman's scathing commentary about foolish girls and cowboys who made promises they would not keep. She ignored the gossip from the other dancers, some of whom were envious, others pitying. Only Lily seemed genuinely happy for her. You deserve this, Lily said the night before Georgiana was set to leave. You deserve someone who looks at you like you hung the moon. Just promise me you will write when you get settled. Let me know you made it there safe. I promise, Georgiana said, hugging her friend tightly. Thank you for everything. On a cool October morning in 1885, Georgiana stood outside the stage-coach office in Wickenburg with her single carpetbag of belongings and watched as Porter completed the purchase of their tickets. She had her savings in her pocket, the pouch heavy with $43.60. Porter had insisted on buying both tickets with his money from the ranch sale, plus funding for lodging and food until they could find work in San Francisco. 2 tickets to San Francisco, Porter said, handing one to Georgiana. His other hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Ready. Georgiana looked back at the red satin saloon one last time, at the place that had been her prison and her salvation for 2 long years. Then she looked at Porter, at the man who had offered her not just an escape, but a companion for the journey. Ready, she said. The stagecoach journey to California was long and uncomfortable, the roads rough and the stops infrequent. They traveled through desert and mountains, through small towns and vast empty spaces where it seemed like they were the only 2 people in the world. Porter proved to be an easy traveling companion, patient during the long hours, quick to help her down from the coach at each stop, careful to maintain a respectful distance that made her feel safe rather than abandoned. At night, they stayed in small way stations, taking separate rooms when available. But on the third night, when the only accommodation was a barn with clean hay, they lay down side by side with a respectable distance between them and talked quietly in the darkness. "Are you scared?" Porter asked. "Terrified," Georgiana admitted. "I have no idea what we are doing or if we can make this work. What if there are no jobs? What if we run out of money? What if San Francisco is just another version of Wickenburg?" "Then we will figure it out together," Porter said. He reached across the space between them and found her hand. "I cannot promise this will be easy. I cannot promise we will succeed, but I can promise I am not going anywhere. Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," Georgiana repeated, and the word felt like a prayer and a promise all at once. They reached San Francisco on a foggy November morning, and Georgiana's first glimpse of the city took her breath away. It was enormous, sprawling across hills with buildings stacked upon buildings, ships crowding the harbor, and streets teeming with more people than she had seen in her entire life. The noise was overwhelming, the smell of salt water and coal smoke and humanity all mixed together. "It is something, is it not?" Porter said, staring at the city with wide eyes. "It is terrifying," Georgiana said honestly. "That too." He squeezed her hand. "Come on, let us find a place to stay and then we can start figuring out our next move." They found a modest boarding house in a working-class neighborhood, a place with clean rooms and a landlady who asked few questions as long as the rent was paid on time. Porter rented 2 rooms, side by side, still maintaining the respectful distance that both frustrated and reassured Georgiana. "I meant what I said back in Wickenburg," he told her after they had settled in. "I am not going to pressure you into anything. We can take this as slow as you need." "What if I do not want to go slow?" Georgiana heard herself say, surprising them both. Porter's eyes darkened. "Then we do not go slow." "But Georgiana, I want to do this right. I want to court you properly the way you deserve. I want to marry you, build a life with you, not just share a bed because it is convenient or expected." His words melted something in her chest that she had not even realized was frozen. "You really mean that?" "Every word." He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch careful and reverent. "You are not a dance hall girl to me. You are not someone I rescued or some debt you owe me. You are the woman I am falling in love with, and I want to do this the right way." "I think I am falling in love with you too," Georgiana whispered, admitting it to herself as much as to him. "I think I have been since that first night you asked me to dance." Porter smiled, that sunrise smile that made her heart race. "Then we have all the time in the world. Let us build something real, something that lasts." They spent their first week in San Francisco exploring the city and looking for work. Porter found employment at the docks, loading and unloading ships for a freight company. The work was hard and the pay modest, but it was steady. Georgiana had a more difficult time. Most respectable positions required references she did not have, and when she tried to be vague about her employment history, potential employers looked at her with suspicion. Finally, she found work in a laundry, washing clothes for wealthy families. The hours were long and the work was backbreaking, but it was honest employment, and she took pride in earning her wages without having to smile or dance or pretend to be someone she was not. In the evenings, she and Porter would walk through the city streets, talking and laughing, getting to know each other outside the artificial environment of the saloon. She learned that he loved reading but had few opportunities to acquire books. She told him about her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher before her father died, and those dreams became impossible luxuries. They shared meals in small restaurants, counting their coins carefully, but allowing themselves small pleasures. On Christmas Eve, 3 months after they had arrived in San Francisco, Porter took her to a small church on a hill overlooking the bay. They sat together in a back pew, listening to the congregation sing carols, and Georgiana felt something she had not felt in years: peace. She was not alone anymore. She had Porter and he had her, and maybe that was enough. As they walked back to the boarding house through streets dusted with rare San Francisco snow, Porter stopped beneath a gas lamp and turned to face her. "I know I said we would take things slow," he began, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "And I know we have only been here a few months. But Georgiana, I cannot wait any more. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Georgiana felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Porter pulled a small box from his coat pocket. Inside was a simple gold band, nothing fancy, but when he slipped it onto her finger it felt like the most precious thing in the world. "I have been saving," he explained, "putting aside a little from every paycheck. I wanted to get you a ring with a stone, something really beautiful, but the jeweler said this is real gold and it will last forever, just like us." "It is perfect," Georgiana said, throwing her arms around him. "You are perfect." They kissed under the gas lamp while snow fell around them, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had taken a risk on love and won. They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where he had proposed, with a kindly minister and 2 witnesses pulled from the congregation. Georgiana wore a simple blue dress she had bought with her savings, and Porter wore his best shirt and trousers. They were not fancy people, and it was not a fancy wedding, but when they spoke their vows and Porter kissed her as his wife, Georgiana felt like the luckiest woman in the world. That night, in Porter's room, which had become their room, they came together as husband and wife. Porter was gentle and patient, treating her like she was made of glass, precious and irreplaceable. Afterward, she lay in his arms and finally let herself believe that this was real, that she was allowed to have this happiness. "What are you thinking?" Porter asked, running his fingers through her hair. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Georgiana said. 2 years ago, I was trapped in Wickenburg, convinced I would spend the rest of my life dancing with drunken cowboys and counting coins. And now I am here with you and I have never been happier." "You saved yourself," Porter said firmly. "I just bought the tickets and asked to come along. You were always going to leave, always going to build a better life. I am just grateful you let me be part of it." "We saved each other," Georgiana corrected. "You gave me hope when I needed it most. You showed me that I was worth more than I believed I was. That is a gift I can never repay." "You repay it every day just by being you," Porter said, kissing her forehead. "Now stop analyzing and go to sleep. We both have early shifts tomorrow." Georgiana laughed and settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without counting coins or planning escape routes. She was already where she needed to be. The next few years were not easy. Money was always tight, and they both worked long hours just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. But they were happy in a way Georgiana had never thought possible. They moved into a small apartment of their own, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. They saved when they could, splurging occasionally on books for Porter or fabric for Georgiana to sew new dresses. Georgiana discovered she had a talent for sewing, and soon she was taking in piecework from a tailor shop, mending clothes in the evenings to supplement their income. Porter got promoted at the docks, becoming a foreman with better pay and more responsibilities. Slowly, painfully, they built a life together. In the spring of 1887, Georgiana realized she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, worried about the expense and the responsibility, but Porter was overjoyed. He immediately started building a cradle in their small apartment, working by lamplight after his shifts at the docks. "What if I am not a good mother?" Georgiana asked one evening, watching him sand the wood smooth. "What if I do not know how to do this?" "Then you will learn, same as everyone else," Porter said practically. "Besides, any child lucky enough to have you as a mother is going to be just fine. You are the strongest person I know." Their son was born in December, during the coldest winter San Francisco had seen in years. They named him Thomas, after Georgiana's father. He was small and red-faced and absolutely perfect, and when Georgiana held him for the first time, she wept with joy and terror in equal measure. "We made this," Porter said, standing beside the bed and staring at his son with wonder. "We made a whole person." "We did," Georgiana agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "And we are going to give him the best life we possibly can." They kept that promise. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved books like his father and had his mother's determination. They moved to a larger apartment, then eventually to a small house on the outskirts of the city with a yard where Thomas could play. Porter started his own small freight company with a partner, and Georgiana opened a small dress shop from their home, her talent for sewing finally allowing her to work for herself. Money was never abundant, but it was enough. They had food on the table, clothes on their backs, and most importantly, they had each other. 3 years after Thomas was born, Georgiana gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and she was as fearless as she was beautiful. Thomas adored her, carrying her around like a precious doll and reading to her every night before bed. "2 children," Georgiana said one evening, sitting on the porch of their house and watching the sun set over the bay while Porter held Caroline and Thomas played in the yard. "Can you believe we have 2 children? Honestly, some days I can barely believe any of this is real," Porter admitted. "I wake up and see you beside me, see our kids, see this life we built, and I have to pinch myself. I was so lonely before you, Georgiana. I did not even realize how lonely I was until I met you." "I was just surviving," Georgiana said quietly. "Going through the motions, saving my coins, thinking that once I got to San Francisco everything would magically get better, but it would not have. I would have been just as lonely in a new city as I was in Wickenburg. You made the difference. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." Porter leaned over and kissed her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby in his arms. "I love you, Georgiana Kane. I have loved you since the first moment. I saw you counting your coins at that saloon table, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Georgiana said, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas started school, proving to be as intelligent as his parents had hoped. Caroline grew into a spirited child who kept them all on their toes. Porter's freight company grew slowly but steadily, eventually allowing him to hire employees and take a slightly less demanding schedule. Georgiana's dress shop developed a reputation for quality work and fair prices, and she found herself training other women in the art of sewing, giving them the same kind of chance at independence that she had fought so hard to achieve. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. One evening in the summer of 1895, after the children had been put to bed and the house was quiet, Georgiana and Porter sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars come out over the city. "You ever think about Wickenburg?" Porter asked. "Sometimes," Georgiana admitted. "I wonder what happened to Lily and Sally Me, if they are still at the Red Satin or if they managed to get out. I wonder if Madame Lucille is still running the place, or if she finally drank herself to death. But I do not miss it, not even a little bit. I think about my old ranch occasionally, Porter said. Wonder if the new owner is taking care of it, if the dog I left behind found a new home. But I do not regret leaving, not for a single second. Everything good in my life started the night I walked into that saloon and saw you. You know what I think about most, Georgiana said, lacing her fingers through his. I think about that moment when you bought those tickets and asked to come along, how scared I was and how hopeful. How I almost said no because I was too afraid to trust that something good could actually happen to me. And I thank God every day that I found the courage to say yes. I was terrified you would say no, Porter confessed. I had spent weeks planning what to say, trying to find the right words to convince you I was not just some cowboy with foolish dreams. And then when you said yes, I thought my heart was going to burst right out of my chest. Georgiana laughed, remembering that night so clearly even after all these years. The smoke-filled saloon, the tinny piano music, the way Porter's hand had trembled slightly when he handed her the ticket. It seemed like a lifetime ago, and in many ways it was. They were different people now, shaped by the years and the challenges they had faced together. We did well, did we not? Georgiana said softly. We built something good. We built something extraordinary, Porter corrected. Against all odds, despite everything that could have gone wrong, we built a life worth living. We have 2 incredible children, a roof over our heads, work that we enjoy, and most importantly, we have each other. That is more than most people ever get. He was right, Georgiana knew. They had beaten the odds. A dance hall girl and a struggling cowboy, 2 people who should have remained strangers, had somehow found each other and created something beautiful and lasting. As if reading her thoughts, Porter said, You know what I realized the other day? We have been married 10 years. 10 years, Georgiana, and I love you more now than I did the day we got married. Only 10 years, Georgiana teased. It feels like I have known you my whole life. In all the ways that matter you have, Porter said seriously. Everything before you was just a prelude. My real life started the night I asked you to dance. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, swaying gently on the porch swing and listening to the sounds of the city settling in for the night. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas reading quietly to Caroline in her bedroom, his young voice earnest and patient as he helped his sister with her letters. We are raising good kids, Porter observed. Smart, kind, curious. They are going to have opportunities we never had. That was always the plan, Georgiana said, to give them a better start than we had, to make sure they never have to claw their way out of desperation the way we did. They will never know what you went through, Porter said quietly. In a few more years, the Red Satin Saloon will just be a story, something from their mother's past that does not seem quite real. They will never understand what you sacrificed, what you endured. Good, Georgiana said firmly. I do not want them to know. I do not want them to carry the weight of my past. I want them to grow up believing that the world is full of possibilities, that good things can happen to good people. Let them be innocent a little longer. You are a wonderful mother, Porter said, pulling her closer. I hope you know that. I am trying, Georgiana said. Every day I am trying to be better than the person I was, to give them the love and security I never had. You are succeeding, Porter assured her. Thomas and Caroline are lucky to have you. I am lucky to have you. Georgiana rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and honest sweat and the faint smell of the sea that always clung to him after his days at the docks. This was home, she thought. Not the house or the city, but this man beside her, his steady presence and unwavering love. He was her anchor and her sail, keeping her grounded while helping her reach for dreams she had never dared to imagine. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? For seeing me. For not seeing the dance hall girl or the desperate woman with no options, but seeing the real me underneath all of that. For giving me a chance when you had no reason to believe in me. I always had reason to believe in you, Porter said. You believed in yourself enough to save every coin for 2 years. You believed in yourself enough to keep going when most people would have given up. I just had the good fortune to recognize what you already were, someone extraordinary. We should go inside, Georgiana said reluctantly. Early morning tomorrow. 5 more minutes, Porter said. Let us sit here 5 more minutes and count our blessings. So they stayed, swaying gently on the porch swing under the stars, counting their blessings and holding each other close. 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of places, who had taken a chance on love when neither of them had any guarantee of success, who had built a life together one day, one decision, one small victory at a time. The years continued to roll forward, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1898, Porter's business partner died suddenly, and Porter had to work grueling hours to keep the freight company afloat while finding and training a new partner. In 1900, Caroline fell seriously ill with scarlet fever, and for 2 terrifying weeks, they sat by her bedside and prayed she would pull through. She did, but the experience left them both shaken, reminded once again of how fragile happiness could be, but there were good times too. Thomas graduated from high school at the top of his class and won a scholarship to university, the first person in either of their families to receive higher education. Caroline showed a talent for music and began taking piano lessons, filling their home with beautiful melodies. Porter's freight company grew large enough that he could afford to hire a manager and cut back his own hours, allowing him to spend more time with his family. Georgiana's dress shop became one of the most respected in their neighborhood. She employed 6 women, all of them single mothers or widows who needed honest work to support their families. She paid them fairly and treated them with respect, remembering all too well what it was like to be a woman alone in the world with limited options. One of her employees was a young woman named Sarah who reminded Georgiana painfully of herself at that age. Sarah had arrived in San Francisco fleeing an abusive husband, with no money and no prospects. Georgiana had hired her immediately, taught her to sew, and helped her find a safe place to live. Watching Sarah slowly rebuild her confidence and independence felt like closing a circle somehow, like honoring the struggle Georgiana herself had endured years ago. You give these women more than just jobs, Porter observed one evening after Sarah had left for the day, smiling and confident in a way she had not been when she first arrived. You give them hope. Someone did that for me once, Georgiana said, looking at her husband meaningfully. I am just passing it forward. In 1902, Thomas graduated from university with a degree in engineering and immediately found employment with a company building the new electric trolley system throughout San Francisco. He moved into his own apartment, though he visited every Sunday for dinner, bringing stories of his work and the modern wonders that were transforming the city. Caroline, now 15, was beautiful and brilliant, with her father's steady temperament and her mother's fierce determination. She talked about becoming a teacher, about traveling the world, about all the possibilities that stretched before her. Watching her dream with such confidence, Georgiana felt a deep satisfaction. This was what she and Porter had worked for, this freedom for their children, to imagine futures unconstrained by desperation or lack of options. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Porter closed the shop early and the freight company office, and they spent the entire day together, just the 2 of them. They walked along the waterfront where they had spent so many early evenings when they first arrived in the city, ate lunch at a fancy restaurant they could never have afforded in those early years, and visited the church where they had been married. 20 years, Georgiana marveled, standing in the church where they had spoken their vows. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Porter said. I remember everything. Every struggle, every triumph. Every night I went to bed grateful that you chose me, that you trusted me enough to take this journey together. Best decision I ever made, Georgiana said, taking his hand. Saying yes to you that night in Wickenburg, agreeing to let you come along, it changed everything. We changed everything, Porter corrected. Together. That night, lying in bed in their comfortable house with their grown children sleeping down the hall, Georgiana found herself thinking about the girl she had been in Wickenburg. That desperate, lonely young woman counting coins and dreaming of escape. She wanted to go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that she would find love and happiness, and a life beyond her wildest imaginings. But that girl had to make the journey herself, had to find the courage to trust a kind cowboy with blue eyes who saw something in her worth believing in. What are you thinking about? Porter asked sleepily. How far we have come, Georgiana said. How impossible this all seemed back then, and how inevitable it feels now. Like we were always meant to find each other, to build this life together. We were, Porter said with certainty. Across all the miles and all the possibilities, we were always meant to find each other. Georgiana smiled in the darkness, secure in the warmth of his love, the life they had built, the family they had created. She had started with nothing but a leather pouch of coins and a desperate dream. She had ended with everything that mattered. The morning of April 18, 1906, started like any other. Porter left early for the freight company, kissing Georgiana goodbye and reminding her that he would be home by dinner. Caroline had already left for school, where she was now teaching as a junior instructor while continuing her own education. Thomas lived across town now with his new wife, a sweet girl named Margaret whom Georgiana adored. Georgiana was in her shop, cutting fabric for a new dress order, when the world began to shake. At first, she thought a heavy cart was passing by on the street outside. But then the shaking intensified, becoming violent, and she heard the terrible sound of buildings crumbling and glass shattering. She dove under her work table as the shop around her began to fall apart, bolts of fabric tumbling from shelves, her sewing machine crashing to the floor. The earthquake lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally stopped, Georgiana crawled out from under the table, her heart pounding. The shop was destroyed, her beautiful workspace reduced to rubble and broken equipment, but she was alive. Her first thought was for her family. Porter was across town at the freight company. Caroline was at the school. Thomas was in the industrial district near the waterfront. Were they safe? Had they survived? She stumbled out into the street and saw devastation everywhere. Buildings had collapsed, fires were already starting to spread, and people were running in all directions, screaming and crying. The city she had called home for 20 years was being destroyed before her eyes. "Porter," she whispered, then louder, "Porter." She ran toward the freight company, dodging debris and panicked crowds. The streets were nearly impassable, blocked by fallen buildings and broken trolley tracks. It took her an hour to travel what should have been a 15-minute walk, and every second she feared what she would find. The freight company building was still standing, though it had suffered significant damage. She found Porter outside, helping to dig through the rubble of an adjacent building that had collapsed, searching for survivors. When he saw her, he dropped his shovel and ran to her, pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "Thank God," he said over and over. "Thank God you are safe." "Caroline," Georgiana gasped. We have to find Caroline and Thomas." They searched for hours through a city that was rapidly burning. The fires that had started after the earthquake were spreading out of control, and soon the smell of smoke was everywhere. They finally found Caroline at an emergency shelter that had been set up in a park, helping to care for injured children. She saw them and burst into tears, and they held each other while the city burned around them. Thomas found them at the shelter that evening. He had been on a trolley when the earthquake hit, and the trolley had derailed, but he and Margaret had escaped with only minor injuries. The whole family stood together in the park, watching the fires consume the city they loved, and held each other tight. They lost everything in the earthquake and fires. Their house, the dress shop, the freight company office, all of it gone. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and each other. "We will rebuild," Porter said that night as they huddled together in the park with thousands of other refugees. "We did it once. We can do it again." Georgiana looked at her husband, her children, her daughter-in-law. They were all safe. They were all together. And suddenly, she was transported back to Wickenburg, to the night Porter had asked to come with her to San Francisco. They had had almost nothing then, too, just hope and determination in each other. And they had built a beautiful life from that foundation. "You are right," she said, taking Porter's hand. "We will rebuild together." And they did. Over the next year, as San Francisco slowly rose from the ashes, the Kane family rebuilt their lives. They found a new house, smaller than the one they had lost, but sufficient. Georgiana reopened her dress shop in a different location, and Porter partnered with Thomas to start a new freight company specializing in reconstruction materials. Caroline continued teaching, helping to educate the children of families who had lost everything in the disaster. It was hard work, exhausting and sometimes discouraging, but they had faced hard times before and survived. They knew how to endure, how to keep moving forward even when the path ahead seemed impossible. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, they stood together on the porch of their new house and looked out at the rebuilt city. "We have had quite a journey," Porter said, his arm around Georgiana's waist. "From Wickenburg to San Francisco, from nothing to something, losing it all and building again. Through all of it, every triumph and tragedy, we have had each other." "That is what matters," Georgiana said. "Not the house or the shop or the money, just this. You and me together. That is what has always mattered most." "Do you ever regret it?" Porter asked. "Letting me come along that day, tying your fate to a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart." Georgiana turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. There was gray in his hair now and lines around his eyes, but he was still the same person who had asked her to dance 27 years ago. Still kind, still steady, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single second." "You gave me everything, Porter. A home, a family, a life worth living. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You loved me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Porter said, kissing her softly. "The only thing that ever really mattered. I love you, Georgiana Kane. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Georgiana said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Always and forever." They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had weathered every storm. The road behind them was long and sometimes painful, but they had walked it together. And the road ahead, however long or short it might be, they would walk together too. Years continued to pass in comfortable rhythm. Thomas and Margaret had 3 children, giving Georgiana and Porter grandchildren they adored. Caroline married a music professor and had twins, a boy and a girl who inherited their mother's musical talent. The Kane family grew and prospered, rooted in the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other so many years ago. In 1920, Georgiana and Porter celebrated their 35th anniversary with their whole family gathered around them. Their children, grandchildren, even Thomas's oldest daughter who had just gotten engaged, all crowded into their living room for a dinner party that overflowed with laughter and love. "Tell us the story," begged Porter Jr., Thomas's youngest son. He was 10 years old and fascinated by family history. "Tell us how you and Grandma met." Porter and Georgiana exchanged glances, silently communicating the way they had learned to do over 3 decades together. There were parts of that story they had never shared with their children, parts they would never share. The full truth about the red satin saloon, about the desperation that had driven Georgiana to that life, about how close she had come to being trapped there forever. "We met in a small town in Arizona," Porter said carefully, pulling Georgiana close. "Your grandmother was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and I knew the moment I laid eyes on her that she was someone special. I was saving money to move to San Francisco," Georgiana continued, picking up the story. "I wanted a fresh start, a new life, and your grandfather was brave enough to ask if he could be part of that new life. He bought my ticket," Georgiana said, smiling at the memory, "and asked to come along." "Best decision I ever made," Porter said. "Best decision we both made," Georgiana corrected. The grandchildren peppered them with questions about the old days, about the San Francisco they had first seen, about the earthquake and the rebuilding. Porter and Georgiana answered patiently, painting a picture of their youth without dwelling on the harder parts, the loneliness and desperation that had brought them together. Later, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the quiet house, Porter took Georgiana's hand. "We should write it all down," he said suddenly. "The real story, everything that happened. Maybe not to share now, but someday when we are gone, our grandchildren and their children should know the truth. Should know what we overcame to build this family. The truth about the saloon." Georgiana asked, surprised. "About what I was. About who you were," Porter corrected firmly. "A strong, determined woman who did what she had to do to survive. There is no shame in that, Georgiana. There never was." Georgiana considered his words. For so long, she had kept that part of her past locked away, afraid of judgment, afraid that her children and grandchildren would think less of her if they knew. But maybe Porter was right. Maybe there was power in the whole truth, in letting future generations understand the full scope of what their family had come from. "All right," she agreed. "We will write it down. All of it. The good and the bad, the struggles and the triumphs. Let them know that love and determination can overcome anything." They spent the next several months writing their story, taking turns at the kitchen table with pen and paper, carefully documenting their journey from Wickenburg to San Francisco and beyond. It was harder than Georgiana expected, dredging up memories she had tried to bury, confronting the fear and desperation of those early years. But it was also cathartic, a way of making peace with the past and honoring the journey they had made. When they finished, they sealed the manuscript in an envelope with instructions that it not be opened until after both of them were gone. It was their gift to the future, proof that love could triumph over adversity, that two people from nothing could build something extraordinary. As the 1920s progressed, age began to slow them down. Porter's joints ached from years of physical labor, and he finally retired fully from the freight company, leaving it in Thomas's capable hands. Georgiana closed her dress shop, though she still took in occasional sewing projects from old customers who had been with her for decades. They spent their days quietly, reading together, taking short walks, playing with their grandchildren when they visited. No regrets. Porter asked one evening in 1925 as they sat together on their porch swing, a routine they had maintained for decades. "None," Georgiana said firmly. "I have lived a life beyond anything I could have imagined in my wildest dreams. I have loved and been loved. I have watched my children grow and succeed. I have held my grandchildren in my arms. What more could anyone want?" "Nothing," Porter agreed. "We have been blessed, you and I. Against all the odds, we found each other and built something beautiful." "The best things in life are worth fighting for," Georgiana said. "You taught me that, Porter. Before you, I was just running away. You taught me that it was possible to run toward something instead, toward hope, toward love, toward a future worth building." "We taught each other," Porter said. "I was running away too, from loneliness, from a life half lived. You showed me what it meant to truly live, to love someone so completely that everything else faded into insignificance. You saved me, Georgiana, just as surely as I helped save you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the city they had called home for 40 years. So much had changed since that first day they arrived, young and frightened and full of hope. The city had grown, modernized, been destroyed and rebuilt. And through it all, their love had remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. Porter died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1927, at the age of 68. Georgiana woke beside him that morning and knew immediately that he was gone. She held his hand and cried, not tears of despair but of gratitude for the 42 years they had shared. He had been her partner, her love, her best friend. And though the pain of losing him was almost unbearable, she would not trade a single moment of the life they had built together. At his funeral, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Georgiana stood and spoke about the man who had changed her life. "Porter Kane saw me when I was invisible," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He loved me when I did not believe I deserved love. He asked me to take a chance on him, and I did, and it was the best decision of my life. He was a good man, an honest man, a man who built his life on integrity and kindness, and he loved me every single day for more than 4 decades. I was the luckiest woman in the world to have been his wife." She lived for another 8 years after Porter's death, surrounded by family, continuing to sew and tell stories and watch her family grow. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had had the great love of her life, and she was content with the memories they had created together. On a spring morning in 1935, Georgiana died quietly in her sleep, at the age of 72. Her children found the sealed envelope with their parents' story, and honoring the instructions, gathered the entire family to read it together. As they read about the dance hall in Wickenburg, about Georgiana's desperate saving, about Porter buying the tickets and asking to come along, about the courage it took to build a life from nothing, there were tears and astonishment. But most of all, there was pride. Pride in ancestors who had faced impossible odds and won. Pride in a love story that had begun in desperation and ended in triumph. Pride in the knowledge that they came from people who understood what truly mattered in life. Thomas, now in his late 40s and the patriarch of the Kane family, closed the manuscript and looked around at his children and grandchildren. "This is our legacy," he said quietly. "Not the business or the money or the house. This love, this determination, this refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. That is what our parents gave us. That is what we must pass down to our children." The family gathered together, multiple generations united by the story of a dance hall girl who saved every coin to leave and a cowboy who bought her ticket and asked to come along. Two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something that lasted far beyond their lifetimes. In the years that followed, the Kane family continued to grow and prosper. Thomas's children had children, who had children of their own. Caroline's twins became renowned musicians who traveled the world but always returned to San Francisco, to the city their grandparents had made home. The story of Georgiana and Porter was passed down through generations, a reminder that love and courage could overcome any obstacle. The freight company that Porter and Thomas had built continued to operate well into the 20th century, eventually evolving into a logistics company that spanned the western United States. But the family never forgot the humble origins, the small shop at the docks where a cowboy and his son had worked side by side to build a future. The dress shop that Georgiana had run became a legend in its own right. Several of her apprentices had gone on to open their own shops, and they carried forward her philosophy of fair wages and respect for workers. One of her great-granddaughters eventually opened a museum dedicated to the working women of San Francisco, featuring Georgiana's story prominently as an example of how determination and skill could lift a woman from poverty to prosperity. Decades after their deaths, a historian researching the 1906 earthquake discovered references to Georgiana and Porter Kane in various records. Intrigued, she tracked down descendants and eventually was granted access to the manuscript they had written. With the family's permission, she published an edited version of their story, and it became a minor bestseller, touching readers with its honest portrayal of love, struggle, and triumph. Young women across the country read about Georgiana Thorne, the dance hall girl who refused to let her circumstances define her, who saved every coin and dreamed of something better. They read about Porter Kane, the cowboy who saw past society's judgments to the real person underneath, who was willing to risk everything for love. And they were inspired to believe that they too could overcome their circumstances, that they too deserved love and respect and a chance at happiness. The church where Georgiana and Porter had married became a pilgrimage site for couples who resonated with their story. People would stand in the same spot where they had spoken their vows and make their own promises to each other, drawing strength from the knowledge that true love was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. In 1985, exactly 100 years after Georgiana and Porter had arrived in San Francisco, the Kane family held a reunion. More than 200 descendants gathered, from toddlers to elderly great-great-grandchildren, all connected by the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other in Wickenburg, Arizona Territory, so many years before. The eldest living descendant, Porter's granddaughter now in her 90s, stood before the gathered family and told the story one more time. About the dance hall and the coins, about the tickets and the journey, about the earthquake and the rebuilding, about 42 years of marriage that had produced a legacy extending far beyond anything Georgiana and Porter could have imagined. "They gave us more than life," she said, her voice trembling with age but strong with conviction. "They gave us an example. They showed us that love is not about perfect circumstances or easy paths. It is about choosing each other every day, about building something together that is stronger than what either person could create alone. That is the gift they gave us, and that is what we must continue to pass down." The family cheered and applauded, united in their pride for the ancestors who had started it all. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirits of Georgiana and Porter smiled, knowing that the love they had fought so hard to build had grown into something magnificent and enduring. Their story became part of the fabric of San Francisco history, A reminder of the thousands of ordinary people who had built the city through determination and hard work and love. In the Mission District, a mural was painted depicting Georgiana and Porter's journey from Wickenburg to San Francisco, from desperation to hope, from loneliness to love. School children learned about them as examples of resilience and courage. But the real legacy was not in the public recognition or the historical acknowledgement. It was in the quiet moments when a Kane descendant faced a difficult decision and thought, what would great-great-grandmother Georgiana do? It was in the young woman who left an abusive relationship because she remembered that Georgiana had refused to let her circumstances trap her. It was in the man who took a chance on love despite the odds because he remembered that Porter had done the same. It was in every marriage that lasted, every child raised with love, every kind gesture extended to a stranger in need. The ripples of that one decision, that night in Wickenburg when Porter bought the tickets and asked to come along, extended far beyond what either of them could have imagined, touching lives across generations and miles. And so the story lived on, a testament to the power of love, the importance of courage, and the unshakable truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. A dance hall girl and a cowboy, two people who should have remained strangers, had found each other and built something that would last forever. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the simple fact that they had loved each other completely, honestly, and faithfully for more than 4 decades. They had taken a chance when every rational voice said not to. They had believed in each other when no one else did. And they had built a love that transcended time, circumstance, and even death itself. That was the story of Georgiana Thorne and Porter Kane, a dance hall girl who saved every coin to leave, a cowboy who bought her ticket and asked to come along, and a love that changed everything.